Wording. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to NASCA's National Report launch on Job One 2020, Transform State Government's Workforce for Tomorrow. We are so thrilled to have each and every one of you with us today. I'm Pam Goins, Executive Director of NASCA, and again, we're excited to share this data with you, to share conversation with the states, and really engage together around transforming state government workforce. We want to kick off our afternoon together with Dan Kim. He is the president of NASCA, and he's going to share a few moments with you to bring some opening remarks. So Dan, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Pam. Hi, everyone. Welcome. Thanks for joining us for the national launch of Job One 2020, Transform State Government's Workforce for Tomorrow. I'm Dan Kim, the president of NASCA and the director for the state of California's Department of General Services. Today's launch is critical to the work of state chief administrators, as this report takes a deep dive into three main components of the future of work, including 1, strategic workforce and succession planning, 2, employee training and learning, as well as 3, performance evaluation and management. Now, this work builds on the 2019 Job One report that addressed the critical workforce goals and challenges in our states. So today you'll hear from both state officials and our research partners about the need for a skilled and flexible workforce that can respond quickly and adapt to changing circumstances. Along with this, we know that we're facing looming budget cuts, reentry questions, and safety concerns, all the while having to ensure that citizen-facing operations continue in the most efficient fashion. So today, you'll find some of the data to be startling and also humbling. And I look forward to hearing from all of you during our discussion. Again, I want to welcome you to NASCA and encourage you to find a new member, connect by chat, and discover ways for you to partner in the future. Now, let me introduce Jason Jackson, chairman of NASCA's Research and Policy Committee, who spearheads this research project. Jason, I'll turn the floor to you.
Thank you, Dan. Actually, Jason is having just a moment of audio issues, so I'm going to just step in and welcome everyone on his behalf. Jason has worked tirelessly as chair of NASCA's Research and Policy Committee. They've really spearheaded this along with Jamie Rogers, our deputy director, to get to the point that we are today, to really have an opportunity to unpack the three main buckets that you heard Dan just speak about. One of the things that we wanted to make sure you knew is that this is a long process. This is deep research that we do with our two signature research partners. You're going to hear today from Lisa Lagas with Accenture and Bob Oglesby from NeoGov, and they have worked with us over the course of more than a year through surveys, interviews, focus groups, and research to bring these data points and statistics to you today. All of this started back in September of 2019, again, working through NASCA existing events, doing surveys, and talking directly with state chief administrators. And we just want to look at, again, what the research is telling us, what the data has brought and bubbled up to the surface. I do want to make sure that you know that NASCA works very effectively and efficiently to produce information and research for all of our members across the country. We have four main goals at NASCA within our research. We want to support our state chief administrators' priorities, accelerate learning while promoting excellence, advance information exchange and discussion like we're doing today, and join with our stakeholders on cutting-edge research related to state government operations. As I mentioned, the data that we're presenting today is from a survey of 753 city, county, and state government employees and 63 human resources directors. We also conducted a focus group and a working session alongside NASCA events. Finally, we did a series of detailed interviews over the last several months to call out the most informative details contained in the report. As chief administrators, you've all been leaders in how your states have adapted to respond to the pandemic while continuing to deliver essential services. We hope that this report that you're going to hear about today will be useful to you and your entire teams as you continue to respond to the pandemic and position your state for a stronger future. As Executive Director, along with my team, I want to make sure that we publicly thank Accenture, NeoGov, and all the state chief administrators who participated to provide, gather, and help us analyze the important information and the data in this year's report. I'm really looking forward to hearing the discussion today. We're going to have an opportunity to hear from 3 states, Pennsylvania, Tennessee, and Oregon, about what good really looks like in their own state, along with hearing from Leslie Scott, who is the Executive Director of NASB, the Personnel Executives. But first, we're going to take a little dive into the data and actually take a look at some of the most important notes that we will cull from the report. Kayla, if you can pull up our slides. I do want to introduce again Lisa Lagas from Accenture and Bob Oglesby from NeoGov. So Kayla, if you'll go to the next slide, please. Again, just sharing with you that NASCA has a long-standing approach to our research, making sure that we are delivering the most important information to you in the states. Next slide. Again, just repeating a little bit about our background and methodology. This all started in September of 19, looking with Accenture and NeoGov through surveys, conversations, and interviews, and then really looking at how the pandemic shifted a lot of the work that we were doing beginning March 13th. We all will remember that date for a long time to come. So really taking a look at the existing data and how that had to transform based on the global health pandemic. So again, we know that this year's unique challenges are really around strategic workforce and succession planning, employee training and learning, as well as performance evaluation and management. So Bob, let me tee it up with you and let you share a little bit about our 3 main buckets.
Hey, Pam, were you going to introduce Leslie and let her say something before we got started?
Leslie's going to talk a little bit after you share the data.
Okay, great. Thank you. Hey, everybody. Bob Oglesby, Strategic Advisor with NeoGov, former State Chief Administrator, State of Tennessee. Before I start the discussion of the findings of this research project, I want to briefly talk about the first of the study's 3 focus areas, which is strategic workforce planning and succession planning, which are not only of high importance in their own right, but they both need to be kept in mind as we discuss the other 2 critical areas of this study. I think it's worth a few moments to just define both of these processes so we all have a clear understanding of what we're talking about. Strategic workforce planning is the process of proactively anticipating an organization's current and future hiring needs and the gaps in between to help ensure the entire organization has the resources needed to meet its goals. Succession planning is the process for identifying and developing new leaders to replace predecessors when they leave any part of the organization. The COVID-19 outbreak, remote work, the fiscal crisis, repurposing, and reductions in the workforce, all these change agents have underscored the importance of having both a strategic workforce plan and a succession plan. We suggest states should have a system-wide strategic workforce plan that builds a complete big picture view of talent. Having this plan is even more critical now, given we have entered a new age of automation and augmentation, and also given the extreme difficulty many states are having to continue to experience for the competition of talent, with the number of applicants per job having dropped 27% over the last 7 years. We also recommend states have an integrated enterprise-wide succession plan that they are also constantly keeping current, given more than 35% of the public sector's workforce is now over the age of 55. So with that perspective, let's discuss the study's findings, which confirm some of the challenges state governments have in developing these plans, as well as some of the differences in perceptions we identify between employees and HR managers as to the status of these state government programs. Next slide. Let's go one more, Kayla. Thank you. One of the biggest challenges in implementing enterprise plans, besides the lack of available resources to do the work, is that workforce planning, succession planning are rarely centralized functions. This is confirmed not only by our own survey, but by NASB's as well. So development of these system-wide plans isn't going to come easy until some entity is given that responsibility. Next slide. Our research goes on to confirm having these plans are a must-do, as both employees and HR directors agree that government is not prepared to fill vacancies, and they are also not preparing the next generation of government leaders. Our survey found only 30% of HR directors and 27% of employees say the next generation of leaders are prepared to fill vacancies from retiring leaders. And while 59% of HR directors say they are preparing the next generation of leaders to fill these vacancies, only 27% of employees agree. And while 37% of HR directors say they have a process in place to transfer institutional knowledge from retiring leaders to the next generation, only 23% of employees agree. Next slide. Our survey also finds that about half, 48% of employees say they don't have a clear understanding of the knowledge, experience, skills, and behaviors needed to move up in the organization. And about half, or 49% of HR directors agree. These required skills include technical skills, management support skills, and soft skills, which have become even more critical with remote work. Organizations and employees themselves need to push towards a better understanding of the required skills, how to develop them, and how to keep the skills relevant. Next slide, and I'll turn it over to Lisa.
All right, thank you, Bob. Just one second here. All right, so you guys able to hear me okay and see me okay? Thank you very much. All right, well, hi everybody. Good afternoon. My name is Lisa Lagas. I'm a managing director with Accenture and co-sponsor of the Job One research with Pam and Bob, and I'm really excited to be here today, so thank you for joining us. So I'm going to take you through the next two topics, training and learning and performance evaluations. So Bob discussed that one of the strategies for workforce planning is to build the skills needed for your future organization. However, we have seen that many public service training and learning development programs are not meeting the expectations of employees to build the leadership and technical skills that they need now or into the future. We've also seen that with COVID-19, the way that employees are working is shifting, and how services are being delivered to constituents is also changing. Therefore, the skills needed to succeed will change. There's a lot more focus on communication. There's a need for more leadership and coaching. And so this is a perfect opportunity for states to really look at how training is being delivered and what could be changed. Based on our research, we saw that about 48% of employees say that government is falling short of their expectations for leadership training, and 42% say the same about technical training, and further 40% about upskilling in technical skills in general across continuing education courses. What's I think even a little bit more alarming is that 13% of employees would say that training is high quality and a good use of their time. So even though they're going to training or attending training, it's not delivering the value that they would expect. Next slide, please. So in terms of this slide highlights really the gap between employee perspectives and HR directors when it comes to the value of training and the outcomes. As I mentioned earlier, employees don't believe that they are able to acquire the skills they need through the current training and development programs, specifically when it comes to taking on new responsibilities and advancing, managing their own employees if they're put into supervisory roles, and leading the organization as people retire. So what we're finding that if states don't address this challenge, they are going to have trouble attracting new workers who are expecting this as they come into the workforce, as millennials and Gen Zs traditionally do. Next slide. So the last piece of focus that we looked at from a research perspective was the effectiveness of the training methods. And so not surprising, in-person classroom training was in the top 3 methods at 70%, and both coaching and mentoring and apprenticeships were also viewed as very effective. And I would say that generally both HR directors and employees felt the same about the methods of training being the most effective. While online learning and mobile learning aren't necessarily rated as effective, there are opportunities to blend both these more high-touch methods with online learning to achieve success. And we're seeing that more and more as we're living in this new remote workforce age. And so there's definitely opportunity to learn how to improve the effectiveness of training across all these methods. Next slide. All right, so if you want to move on to the next slide, thank you very much. So on the performance management front, one of the inputs to performance evaluations is really priority setting and understanding your career path and what's expected of you. However, we saw from our survey that only 52% of employees surveyed feel that they have a good understanding of what they need to do to move up in an organization, and even fewer set goals to make sure that they achieve and move in that direction. And I've often seen in many state organizations that the ability to advance isn't necessarily a result of a plan. Sometimes it can be the result of an individual leaving the organization based on retirement or transfer. So there needs to be renewed focus on employee career planning and an evaluation of performance. If you go to the next slide, please. So for those organizations that are performing these activities whereby they're setting priorities and they're measuring them, it's interesting to see the difference in the survey results. On the right, you have the HR director's responses, and on the left, you have the employee responses. 72%, which is the combination of the 34 and 48% of the on the HR director side, believe that they're meeting or exceeding expectations, while only 56% of employees feel the same. Next slide. All right, and then the last aspect of performance management is the frequency of feedback and consistency. So really the frequency and opportunity to receive both formal and informal feedback are considerations when it comes to effective performance management. Employees report that just over half, or 56%, receive formal feedback annually, and that 25% do receive some informal feedback monthly. Again, there's definitely room for improvement here because we do see that employees need to be nurtured and coached throughout the life cycle of their career to be successful. All right, next slide. So in summary, Bob, why don't you get started on some of the recommendations?
Thanks, Lisa. Yeah, this is a really high-level review that we just gave you in 15 minutes. It's a lot more great content in the report, so don't think you're going to get all the takeaways from that report. We all encourage you to roll up your sleeves and dig in and read this full report and understand what all the content's about. But let's wrap up this part of today's session by reviewing the report's final recommendations. Next slide. More strategic approaches to workforce succession planning, training development, performance management are good for workers and good for states. When states have a clear idea of the skills they need to serve their constituents and communities in today's world, they can attract, develop, and retain talented individuals to drive towards better outcomes. Clearly, most states are early in their journey to a reimagined workforce. Our research project concludes offering the following steps which can help building enduring progress in these three areas of focus. The first one is take an enterprise approach with all of these programs. Consider how you can collaborate with other agencies to get a big picture, holistic view of your workforce and to adopt better system-wide policies and practices. Second, identify who owns workforce planning and succession planning. Regardless of where a person or team sits, collaborate as an enterprise to identify the needed skills and gaps in the current workforce. In making this assessment, revisit any new enlightenments you may have encountered during the COVID-19 emergency to fundamentally rethink your needs. And rather than working to fill openings, openings, be strategic about the talent you need to support the state workforce of the future. Third, reevaluate your work. Consider how tasks are currently completed, whether by people on site, people working remotely, machines, or some combination thereof, and how that work is measured and evaluated. In addition to building a plan for how you will manage every employee's output, regardless of how their tasks are completed, also rethink how you'll develop their skills and evaluate their performance. Lisa, you want to get the last two?
Sure. Thank you. So training and learning really must be a priority for state organizations and other public sector organizations to make sure that you grow your future leaders and also attract people to public sector careers. Leadership needs to invest in high quality training programs that balance the method of trainings that are most effective. And I would say also allow time for employees to participate in training. I know all of us have probably been asked to attend training sessions, but haven't had the time to focus or are trying to balance even more so now that we're in a virtual work situation of attending a conference or a training session while we're continuing to perform our day-to-day job. But that's an important aspect of an employee's growth and also advancement. The other thing I would say is that training should be seen as a reward for employees. You know, nominate those high performers that you think have demonstrated the ability to grow and achieve further success. If people view that as a reward, I think they'll be more apt and more inclined to attend and participate. Also highlight those certifications within your organization if possible. When it comes to performance evaluations, we'll hear later from some of the states that are doing some innovative things around this. But one of the things that we find most effective is really standardizing what is being captured in terms of performance evaluation and how performance is measured, and then ultimately the frequency of performance. But make sure that you're doing some personalization and individualization to performance evaluations based on an employee's role and career path. For example, my organization recommends that we provide feedback after certain priorities are met and also annually, but we encourage monthly checkpoints, and those are more informal. And what I've done and what I've seen work and be successful is that you work with the individuals to talk about their goals and objectives and set up the right frequency and time frame in order to achieve those. So those are just a few snippets into the research. As Bob mentioned, that the report is now available, and we'll talk more about that in the next session. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob and Lisa, both. We really appreciate you sharing today. And as they both mentioned, this is just a very small snapshot of the information that's contained in the full report. So please make sure you have an opportunity to go to NASCA's Knowledge Center and take a look at that. I mean, you also received it in your email and a reminder today. Again, make sure you take an opportunity to look at all of the information there. Now we want to call on Leslie Scott, who is the Executive Director of the National Association of State Personnel Executives, to give us a little insight into what she's hearing from her members and really how the significance of these data will play a part with HR directors around the country. So Leslie, we'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Pam. And I certainly appreciate this opportunity to share with you a little bit about what our members have been talking about in relation to this report. We always enjoy working with NASCA. We consider NASCA a great partner, along with our partners, Accenture and NeoGov. And I started thinking about the beginning of this report. I remember being on conference calls this time a year ago, talking about this initiative, and Jamie Rogers and Jenny Brody and Bob Oglesby coming to our mid-year meeting in January in DC, and talking to our members about this initiative and this report. And our members were certainly interested in the outcomes and the topics, and were willing to share a lot of anecdotal information to support this. So that brought me thinking about what we were talking about in January. And it was paid parental leave was the hot topic of the meeting. And it was seen as a great recruitment and retention tool, very popular with governors. Some states had already implemented a plan, some states were discussing it. And so, states finally, we were talking about budgets. We heard from NASBO, the budget officers, and they were talking about relatively healthy state budgets. We were talking about finally getting pay increases for employees, and hopes for additional ones being approved in the coming legislative sessions. So, we were talking about those things. Again, states felt like they were making, unionized states were making good progress in developing solid relationships with their labor organizations as well. And then, fast forward a few weeks, and we're talking about different kinds of leave: administrative leave, expanded FMLA, sick leave, and we're talking about pay raises in the form of hazard pay and hero pay, and unfortunately now hiring freezes, layoffs, furloughs, early retirement incentives. So, the landscape has changed since this report has started, but these issues are still at top of mind for our members. But I think the appetite has changed, and for the ability to change. And so I think that's an important to seize the momentum with some of these recommendations in this report. We know now telework can be done, and agency silos can come down in a cooperative effort. So we're excited. I think our members will be excited to share this report with their staffs and others in state government, just as NASCA members will. First, I just wanted to talk a little bit about the three topics: succession and workforce planning. I'm going to age myself here a little bit, but I started with NASB. I was hired in the summer of 1999, and I actually hadn't started working for NASB yet, but I had been hired, and I went to their annual meeting in Columbus, Ohio. And the first session I saw featured Molly Anderson, who was the director of HR in Iowa at the time, and then eventually became a NASCA member later on. And she was wearing a captain's hat, pretending she was on a boat on the Titanic. And she was talking about workforce planning and the impending retirement tsunami. And we've been talking about workforce planning ever since. In those 21 years, it's been one of our top 5 issues every year since then. And I think the reason it's always a top issue is I don't think any state feels like they do it well. There are some states who feel like they're maybe making some progress, but sometimes, a couple steps forward, a step back, and dealing with budget issues, et cetera, with the pendulum swinging between centralization and decentralization. But in a nutshell, it's a hard thing to do. And so I think keeping the focus on it, COVID has really opened up some thoughts on looking at competencies and skills on an enterprise-wide level. I think, for example, when maybe DMV employees who weren't able to work or telework were moved over into unemployment agencies because they had similar skill sets and competencies. So hopefully there's more of a thought about making workforce more of an enterprise-wide approach rather than an agency by agency, department by department. And I think certainly as budgets get tight, states tend to centralize and consolidate efforts, and so we're hopeful that some fresh eyes on this topic that I know I've been working on for 21 years now. So moving on to training and learning. Again, with healthy budgets, states have really invested in training and development for their employees. I think particularly with leadership development and identification of top performers. Obviously, there's still room for improvement as the research showed, but I think there was some momentum to keep moving forward. It was seen as a great recruitment and retention, valued as a recruitment and retention tool, I should say. And training staffs have grown, training capacity has grown. And of course, Tennessee is the rock star in this area. So I'll let Juan share a little more about that. But states were really modeling a lot of their efforts based upon Tennessee. I think something that's to be concerned about in the future is when budgets get tight, training tends to be on the chopping block pretty early. So I'm demonstrating the importance of training, I should say, and relating it back to workforce planning, and even performance management will be very important to keep some of the training dollars available. And then finally, performance management. I almost want to say see workforce and succession planning. In my 21 years, I don't think any state really feels like they're doing it well. I think there's, just like we'll hear, some states are making some progress, but it's still a challenge. I think the appetite is there again to look at the performance management process and what's being measured, particularly with telework. There'll be emphasis on supervisory training, reaching out to the employees working remotely, and hopefully there'll be better contact, more focused contact that will help in some of the performance management. But again, we're hopeful that we can seize the momentum and an appetite for change here, some of the silver linings. So again, I really think this data is going to be very helpful to our members and shows the importance and value of these efforts. And finally, I just again want to thank NASCA, Accenture, and NeoGov for this report. At the end of the day, I think our members are most concerned with supporting state employees and making the work environment a great one, and supporting them through these challenging times. At the end of the day, these are human beings who are dealing with the anxiety of being in a pandemic, living in a pandemic, supporting children who are learning virtually at home, maybe from some financial stresses in the house, with a partner or a spouse who may have lost their jobs, possible furloughs or layoffs heading their way. So I think it's going to be important to make some of these changes and move forward, but with a clear understanding that we're supporting human beings and the human capital that states say is their most valuable resource. So again, I appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you, Leslie, so much. We always enjoy collaborating with you and your members. So thank you for joining us today. I think you hit the nail on the head with two different things. One, by saying that 2020 is like the Titanic. We feel like we're all about ready to fall over the bow of the ship. But at the same time, we are excited about the positive momentum that's happening in the states and really looking at these three major topics and how states can transform their workforce. So now let's take a few minutes and unpack each of the three large buckets. We're going to start with strategic workforce and succession planning. And we're going to hear from our chair, Jason Jackson, who's going to share a little bit about this, and we'll tee up some of our conversations with Tennessee.
It's Jason Jackson here from Nebraska, and it's my pleasure to introduce the Strategic Workforce and Succession Planning component of our 2020 Job One study. This component identified a number of areas for us as states and as chief administrators to improve and make our workforce planning and succession planning more strategic in character. These are challenging times in and of themselves, but the complexity of the COVID pandemic has really made the necessity of being strategic about workforce planning and succession planning all the more apparent. How we used to run the business is no longer adequate for meeting the needs of the future workforce within state government. To that end, the study identified three key areas where we as states can learn from one another and improve our overall talent planning. The first diagnosed a lack of ownership that's characteristic of state governments for who is just overall in charge of the succession planning process and results. In some states, that's an HR function. In others, the agency or the division owns that process. And in other states, it's not at all clear, and it's entirely ambiguous about who owns the outcome on making sure that the next generation of talent is ready to mature into positions of leadership when the need arises. Secondly, we diagnosed that there's often ineffective processes across our respective teams. A lot of diversity among the states in terms of, is the process of talent management centralized or decentralized? And the study goes into diagnosing those differences and the potential pitfalls that arise from those deficiencies. And thirdly, the study just identifies the fluidity of the current workforce, already a challenge before the pandemic and even more so now as work styles are changing, worker preferences are changing, career expectations are changing, and it compels us to need to be much more strategic in terms of how we manage workforce, talent, and succession planning specifically. The study further provides a couple of case studies from states that are doing this well and are on the forefront of testing innovative solutions that can help us and our peers in other states role model what good looks like. And those include Louisiana and in Pennsylvania with some innovative ideas in terms of what success could look like in this space. So we hope you'll find this component of Job 1 2020 informative and give you some ideas in terms of how we as state chief administrative officers can flex, both with respect to just where the workforce is going generally, but in particular with respect to what the pandemic has imposed upon us in terms of the needs of managing the workforce of the future. We hope you enjoy.
Thank you, Jason, for teeing up and unpacking the first topic around strategic workforce and succession planning. We're actually going to go to Pennsylvania. You heard him mention some of the case studies that we did as part of the report structure. We're going to hear from Secretary Michael Newsom to tell us a little bit about what good really looks like in Pennsylvania. So Secretary Newsom, we're going to turn the floor over to you.
Oh, thank you so much, Pam, for allowing me to kick off this first section. Are we good? Am I in? Hello?
Yes, sir. We hear you just fine.
You hear me just fine? Okay, great. So, Governor Wolf and I both have come from the private sector. And in the private sector, succession planning is taken very seriously. It's a requirement for any company to sustain itself for long-term viability. In government, not so much. Succession planning is more challenging, and for a few reasons. Administrations change over every 4 to 8 years, which makes it difficult to plan ahead. As employees anticipate a change or an end to an administration, especially at the top, they tend to move on to other jobs, usually outside of government. And due to generous pension plans, employees may choose to retire early, oftentimes disrupting the whole planning process and disrupting administrations when key employees leave earlier than expected. So when I worked with Governor Wolf, before he became governor, he and I worked in his family-owned business. I had him as a boss and I had him as a business partner. And when he asked me to come on to his administration as secretary of his administration, I knew exactly what the first thing I had to do with him was ask him exactly, what do you want me to do as your Secretary of Administration? And his response was very, very clear. He wanted me to help streamline governmental operations and organizations, retool the organizations, just like we did at the Wolf Organization, and make it as customer friendly as possible. Now, I must admit, and we talked about this as well, streamlining government in PA had been tried a couple times before, in vain attempts, if you will, to flatten organizations within the agencies. They called it span of control. And within most of the agencies, this was inadequate in that there were too many supervisors with less than an optimum number of direct reports. We had some supervisors that had just one person, or some with 2 or 3. And our goal was to set a minimum of 4 to 5 direct reports. And we even sought to maximize that number as well to make supervisors even more effective. And then we wanted that maximum number to be somewhere around 8 to 10. Now, we also changed the focus. And one of the reasons that this hadn't worked before was this whole concept of span of control kept coming back over and over again to the employees. So we looked to change the way we looked at this. We looked for a new term, and we came up with the term Commonwealth Workplace Management, or CWM. And the reason for doing this was to encompass more than just looking at the supervisory position. We wanted agencies to look at their entire organization. We wanted them to provide an opportunity to retool their business to meet the changing times of this new marketplace that we're in right now. Fast growing, ever changing, this government that we have under a very progressive governor, Governor Wolf. And you have Governor Wolf, and you have myself and others who are former business folks basically directing these outcomes. So CWM, the Commonwealth Workplace Management goals, we believe support succession planning by a few reasons. One, it right sizes the agency to support future sustainability of government. It improves the quality of supervision. It provides a clearer line of succession by reducing the number of supervisors, which allows managers the opportunity to mentor and groom employees for the important supervisory positions within their organization. And finally, which so much more we can do, but by having more direct reports, it gives the managers more of a choice in deciding whom to mentor and to groom. So much more that this Commonwealth Workplace Management has afforded us. One other reason that this hadn't worked in the past was that we hadn't really committed to it. And what I mean by that is the Office of Administration was telling everyone else how to do it, but we hadn't done it ourselves. So the first thing was we were the leaders. So over this last year or so, maybe just a little bit more than a year, we right-sized the Office of Administration. We got rid of all of the 1 and 2 direct reports under supervisors. We did that first. We learned some lessons. We created opportunities for other folks within the organization, and now we're ready to roll it out to the rest of the Commonwealth. Now, the second thing we did was we looked at attrition, particularly retirements. Now, we currently know who is eligible for retirement based on age and years of service and other criteria, but we often were surprised by announced early retirements, and sometimes by those who waited much longer than we thought to retire. In other words, we knew who could potentially retire, but not necessarily who would likely retire. So we created what I'm calling a retirement predictive model, which essentially takes that list of retirement eligible employees, reworks it, and attempts to predict who is actually going to retire within the next 1 to 3 years, based on criteria of those who actually retired within the last few years. Now, we provide this list of potential retirements to agency heads to help them plan and start appropriate conversations for succession planning within their senior team. So I could spend a lot of time talking about this, but in summary, Commonwealth Workplace Management and this retirement predictive model and other similar things that are under development together, they will not only help sustain government, but we believe should help improve government governmental functions and by properly preparing them for the changing times that we currently face. So Pam, thank you for allowing me to kick off this first session.
Thank you, Secretary Newsom. It's always wonderful to have you join us and share all of your thoughts and strategies from Pennsylvania. So let's turn now to have a conversation with our research partners, Bob and Lisa, talking a little bit about strategic workforce and succession planning, and again, really unpacking this one main bucket here. So Lisa, let me start with you. In the report, we know that there were several challenges that halted most of our HR directors from successfully engaging in succession planning. Can you give us an idea of some of the hurdles that we were seeing in the states before the global pandemic, as well as an idea of some of the changes as state workforces became remote simply overnight?
Yeah, thank you very much, Pam. I think, the comments that Secretary Newsom just shared as well were really insightful and really highlighted, a lot of the challenges that public sector organizations face, just based on the nature of their environment. They are, required to reevaluate their organization, every 4 years or every, election cycle. And you have folks that are coming and going and have been there for many years. But at the same time, the opportunity for succession planning isn't, a topic, and looking at advancement and career path within the public sector organization isn't necessarily at the forefront. What we've seen is that, I'd say before and after, most organizations that, we surveyed and studied found that, there really isn't an owner for the succession and workforce planning function in all states if you have a decentralized model. And so when there isn't that authority or ownership, it's hard for you to, really champion a program and get it rolled out to the entire statewide organization. So you need to look at it from an enterprise level, but if you don't have the authority, I think it makes it very challenging to do so. The other piece of this is that even if you do have the authority, it's very hard to know where to begin. You need to look at, the fact that, a state organization is providing so many different functions. They're all like different entities, right? You have a public safety unit, you have human services, you have administrative functions, and then you have unions and civil service organizations that are also have policies and regulations that you need to balance. So it's an incredibly daunting undertaking to identify what you have, and to do that, takes a tremendous amount of time and expertise. So I think with the onset of COVID-19 and the pandemic, everyone was faced with a tremendous challenge of moving the workforce to a remote teleworking environment. This gave states opportunities to make changes where maybe they hadn't been able to before in terms of how they operate. And we're going to see that going forward. Some of the states that I personally have worked with and have heard about, they've made changes in technology to support, working remotely. And they've also changed, processes to support day-to-day activities. We're also seeing many state organizations that shifted to remote work more on the administrative side or the technology side are now doing that for other services like supporting virtual courtrooms or supporting virtual licensing or anything of that nature. So, we're going to continue to see a tremendous change. And so with that, the workforce needs to change and the skills of the workforce need to change. So, well, we haven't seen a lot of steps in terms of what they have done since COVID-19 yet. I hope that, COVID-19 serves as a catalyst to launch, a workforce planning initiative to really look at what am I going to need going forward? And then further, how do I acquire or build those skills as I move forward here and as Leslie spoke about, don't necessarily cut training budgets and don't necessarily reduce the funding available for the organization so that they can develop that leadership that they're going to need.
Thanks, Lisa. And I think we heard both Lisa and Leslie both speak about enterprise-wide succession planning and how critically important that is. Yet we know that states are struggling with that on a day-to-day basis. Bob, share a little bit with us about some of your suggestions on perhaps the most efficient strategies for those states who are trying to move to an enterprise-wide approach, knowing that we're looking at a different set of skills and competencies. But really, what would you share with the states on some of the most efficient solutions, especially in our changing conditions?
Thanks, Pam. As Leslie mentioned, succession planning is hard, no doubt about it. And it's a lengthy process because of its scale and complexity. And because our survey found so many agencies say they don't even know where to begin, I thought maybe it'd be best to try to not cover all the steps, but address some of the most first critical steps to get the flywheel moving and on the right path. So this probably won't come as a big surprise, but let me back up. Generally, we suggest the approach of identifying, accomplishing short-term incremental steps. So you can immediately drive value from those and then build upon those en route to achieving your ultimate goal. So the first step, again, won't come as any surprise. It's identifying who will have the authority and responsibility to provide centralized workforce and succession planning. This is critical. You've got to have somebody who's responsible and authorized to make this happen. And they need to have the ability to see this coordinated and implemented across all agencies. It's an enterprise-wide effort, no doubt about it. So one of the best rules of any program is to repeat, right? So that's what we're telling you. If anything else, take this away. You've got to get leadership to assign somebody responsible to get this done. Next, we suggest your government's top leadership needs to collectively develop or update its enterprise-wide vision if you don't already have a current one. It should be aligned with your organization's strategy and goals, defining the right organizational size and structure for the future, and identifying the gaps in between. Again, this is not just an HR function. This is something that the cabinet, the top leadership needs to come together and define who are we, where are we going, probably even with your General Assembly. What do we want to be when we grow up? And it has to be dynamic and adapt. So you've got to define the parameters and a framework for how it's going to be updated going forward. And then next is focus on identifying the skills leaders will need, as well as how you can best leverage or even share those skills across the entire enterprise. Talent competition is tough. You may not be able to afford a lot of these people in every department. It's just very expensive to hire some of these top SMEs that you may need to have. So you have to figure out how to leverage them and utilize them across the enterprise. And then you need to assess your current workforce and develop a roadmap with timeline to deploy the skills needed to shape the leaders of tomorrow so they're ready to take over. A valuable short-term step here is to develop a career advancement plan for these future leaders, really for all employees, and it should be tied to their individual performance management and learning development plans. When you get these steps done, we think you'll be well on your way to taking the next group of steps necessary to develop a fully integrated succession management plan and being prepared for the future.
Great, thank you so much, Bob and Lisa. All right, let's unpack the second major bucket in the report, which is employee training and learning. Let's hear from Jason Jackson again.
Colleagues, the second component of the Job One 2020 survey delves into training and learning and development and their importance as we attempt to manage strategically the workforce of the future. It diagnoses several key areas of opportunity in the development space when it comes to the workforce. The first is a recognition that increasingly training delivery needs to be digital. That was true before the pandemic, and it's even more true now. Our teams across the country are flexing to deliver digital services in all aspects of government. And when it comes to the development of our teams and our employees, that's paramount as well. What's more is our teammates have an expectation that their digital experiences in government and at the workplace will be similar in quality to the digital experiences that they enjoy as consumers in their homes. And so it's ever more important that we be able to flex our learning and development programming to be digital in delivery, and of the quality that's on par with the expectations of our teammates as they're going through their learning experiences. Secondly, there's a recognition that we need to be able to scale the personalization of the training and the development experience. Digital and technology can help with that, but survey respondents indicated that people still value the in-person and very personalized touch that accompanies their developmental path. And so we as administrators need to be able to balance those trade-offs and still deliver personalized experiences and personalized development plans, even as we're increasingly leveraging technology and digital training delivery. There were a couple of great case studies that were emphasized in this component of teams that are doing this well. In Washington, there's a case study on how the state of Washington is growing their next generation of finance leadership. They diagnosed a skill gap within their organization in terms of finance talent. And rather than trying to recruit and attract finance talent, they decided to build a more robust training and development program that will allow them to develop internally the financial leaders of the future. In Tennessee, there was a skill gap with the soft leadership skills in terms of middle and senior leadership across state government. And so Tennessee developed a leadership academy that helps people identify what their developmental goals are from a leadership perspective and imbues them with the leadership skills they'll need to be successful as they go forward in their career. We hope you'll find this component of the Job One 2020 study informative and will benefit from the role model of other states that have had successes in this space.
And thank you again, Jason, for teeing up this conversation around employee training and learning. And again, as you heard him mention, we have an exemplary state example from Tennessee. So I'd love to turn the floor to Commissioner Juan Williams, who will share a little bit about what good looks like in Tennessee. Commissioner?
Thank you. I really appreciate the introduction and the kind words as it relates to Tennessee. What does good look like in building effective learning management strategies for state workforce? I'll share with you what the state of Tennessee has done and is doing in this space, really especially as a result of the pandemic. At the state of Tennessee, our goal is to ensure learning continues during the pandemic and works well in the work from home environment that we are all facing. We had to adjust our training methods so that we could meet the needs of the state. And for the state of Tennessee, good means meeting the learning needs of our state employees. However, we are striving to move from good to great. Some of the things we did is we focused on anticipating the future needs and wants of our talent management community and our state employees. We met with leaders from each agency and listened to their concerns and obstacles they were experiencing during the pandemic, as well as shared some best practices from among all the agencies. We made sure that learning continued. And more importantly, that the learning facilitators, we made sure that they were engaged virtually as they would be engaged in face-to-face learning opportunities. Our facilitators were trained to deliver content virtually very early on during the pandemic so that they were positioned for success. Not only did our regular learning continue, we offered additional learning via breakout sessions from subject matter experts in various career fields. And this allowed us to achieve HRCI and SHRM credits for those individuals who had those certifications, where they got additional learning at no cost to the participants. We thought it was important that our HR leaders were able to, and learning individuals were able to maintain their certifications during the pandemic. We also altered 3 of our signature enterprise learning development program and leadership development programs that to offer them virtually so that those leaders chosen to participate could continue to gain leadership insights from nationwide leaders. So those 3 programs, we went from face-to-face sessions of maybe 30 people to up to 150 people. And we had to pivot to do those virtually. And in addition to those signature leadership programs, we digitized all our required HR training for employees. So they could go online to do these required trainings related to HR. We offered surveys after every training and program and asked the question, what could we have done better to meet your needs virtually? We took that information back and we took it to heart and made continuous improvements for each of the event or training programs that we had. For us, it's not just about maintaining during this time our learning and development programs, but it's about learning to thrive and embracing this new normal. We will continue to listen to the voice of the customer. However, we will be also anticipating what future needs that they may have. So those are just some examples of what good looks like in building effective learning management strategies for the state of Tennessee and our workforce. Again, we're focused on communication, leadership, and coaching. And we continue to look at how we will embrace how we do our learning strategies going forward, and looking at the work from home environment using digital learning and gradually incorporating face-to-face, but we also want to listen to what the customers are asking for and maybe offer different opportunities or giving them choices that they can make and how they want to continue to learn and develop with the state of Tennessee. So thank you for your time this afternoon. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Commissioner, so much. I really appreciate your insights and certainly brought up some really intriguing comments and certainly things that we discovered as part of the report as well. So thank you for joining us today. Lisa, let me toss this one over to you. We do know, and we heard from the Commissioner just now, that employees really need that ability to receive very intensive, high quality professional development across their tenure. But we also know that most states have the inability to do this widespread in-person training and upskilling, which leaves states to bolster their online opportunities. Again, to you, Lisa, what suggestions do you have for our audience related to effective training programs that can be offered to both better prepare the state workforce for the role they're in, as well as to provide access to the skills and those competencies that we know they need to move up the career ladder?
Thank you, Pam. Yeah, that's a tremendous example of really trying to balance the multitude of training methods. So I really applaud the work that you guys are doing in Tennessee. I think what is most important when it comes to learning and development is to really look at, as part of your workforce plan, what kind of competencies and behaviors do you need in the organization, and then align them to the various job classifications and roles that you support. I think that's the first piece. And then, I'm going to step into a little bit of the performance evaluation. We need to look at, how are employees performing against those competencies and behaviors, in particular, like moving into a supervisory position or a leadership position, and how are we measuring that to make sure that they are ready for that next step. And what we heard from HR directors and employees was that employees think that they're not ready, but we also saw that HR directors think, maybe they are. So it's an interesting dynamic that occurs. And I think part of it can be brought back to the fact that, it is very challenging to measure the readiness of somebody to move into a new role. But one of the things you can do from a learning and development perspective is set up learning programs that, run the duration of a year or a certain period of time and set up a program like a leadership development program. We've heard Tennessee doing that. We've heard of some organizations, including Washington, that does apprenticeship programs or internships and shadowing programs, whereby you have some classroom-based learning, but then there's some, online digital learning, and then you're paired up with a coach to help you throughout. It's almost like taking a graduate class or a continuing education course, so that you're continuing to be, counseled and coached throughout the duration of that. I think, that is incredibly effective. And that's what we're seeing from employees as well as an effective method for learning to become a leader. It doesn't happen overnight just by attending a class, whether you're in person or online. These are things that can be done or need to be done through experience and coaching and so forth. So I think that's one of the most effective ways. We also have seen there's a lot more creativity nowadays in the way that we can use technology and digital technology in particular. Accenture in particular has developed some virtual reality tools that actually train workers by, putting them in scenarios that are, that they would see in real life, and allowing them to practice those in real life settings. So that's also another way to support learning and practical session training, so that people can start to learn how to handle situations that they may not have been put in other scenarios. So those are a couple of examples that I would recommend.
Great, thank you, Lisa. We do know, and we learned from working on the report, that many of our HR directors said that a lot of the training is really not to the level of quality or a good use of their time. We actually heard from 13% of employees and 7% of HR directors said that, in fact, their training is high quality and does meet that level of standard, that it's a good use of their time. That's a lot of other employees and directors who are really struggling and grappling with the way to make those and bolster those trainings to be beneficial. Bob, let me toss this off to you. What are you recommending to those states who are just beginning to address this challenge and this hurdle as they're trying to focus on enhancing their professional development? What strategies or thoughts do you have for our states?
Thanks, Pam. Looking back over our research and the survey content I came up with just some low-tech ideas I thought might be helpful to everybody. So the first one is just remember, do you want to be an employer of choice? If so, you've got to make career development as a serious differentiating factor. We saw it in the Job One 2019 report. It's a great way to attract job seekers that are really strongly considering the private sector marketplace. So let's get serious about it. It's not just an HR issue, it's about an enterprise-wide approach. Next is respond to people learning differently. You have to offer a variety of methods. I know the remote work has thrown a kink in things. We've had to pivot really quickly from in-person to online classes, but recognize that some of your older workforce are not going to be tech savvy and they aren't going to be comfortable with that. So you've got to be understanding that people learn differently and address those varieties. It's not just a one size fits all. You've heard others talk about customization, individualizing the learning experience. That's what this is about. So offer a variety of methods, keep your content and presentation styles fresh. Make use of pre-course resources, study tips, advice from past students, a description or outline of the course. Sometimes you may have to provide written transcripts as a best practice for those who learn better that way or for future reference to everybody. Make your training easy, from a cost and time point of view. A lot of people want 24/7 access. Make it fun and engaging. Gamification is coming on board. It's not just a trend. It really is helping us identify progress and stackable ways to move forward with badges and so forth. Think about those ways and be open to those innovative ways of making this more approachable and fun for your employees. Offer training and social opportunities. These are good ways to get together and do other things, especially when you're remote working. Possibly even create communities around big topics of discussion and learning. another great opportunity. But most importantly, recognize employees want to advance their careers. So you've got to tie your learning and development into their career paths, career ladders, and your own performance management programs. Look at offering certified programs and linking courses with higher education programs to that end, and offer training focused on the employee's continuous development. Make it individualized, again, incorporate opportunities to offer individual help when you have these online sessions, offer on-the-job, real-time, continuous, one-to-one coaching and mentoring. And last, offer the opportunity to talk to industry experts, influencers, or career mentors. Really make it worth their time. And it's not just about, oh, I have to stop work and work on my career or take a class now. It's part of continuous learning, and it's here to stay, and it's part of what we come to work to do.
Great, thank you, Bob. So Bob and Lisa, you've both given us some excellent examples, some great tools to put in our toolbox. I'm curious if both of you could just tick off 2 or 3 ideas of some state programs or exemplary initiatives around the country that you've discovered, not only in your work, but as we've been producing this national report of those states who are really taking a very strong emphasis on apprenticeships, online learning, micro trainings, those states who are looking at stackable credentials and credentialing. Just a quick idea of some of our states where those on the call could go look for more information.
I can start with, I have heard that Minnesota and Indiana have some unique internship ideas. So, and working with the state of Indiana, I worked with the state chief security officer, and they have really leveraged the local universities in their area to bring in interns to focus on security. You know, these folks are super excited to learn the latest technology with respect to security. It's a skill and a role that they struggle to fill within the state of Indiana with their existing workforce, and also attracting folks at that level. And so it's just been a win-win situation for both the university students as well as the state. And in some cases, those interns become employees, or at least, you know, they've gained skills and they've filled the role for, you know, 1 or 2 years while the individual's in school. So I think that's a great example. The state of Minnesota, I understand, is doing very similar things with respect to technology.
Bob, any thoughts?
Yeah, you know, some of the best practices we're seeing from our customers are, after assessing the needs and the desired employee skill sets, they're embedding those learning assets in employees' daily activities to support real-time performance management. I think that's really an interesting perspective. Again, it's not an either or, it's something you're going to do as part of your daily work. Another one is, you know, I mentioned this just a minute ago, is flipping the employee's mindset from, I'm not stopping doing my work so I can learn, I'm going to learn because it's part of my job. I think that's another interesting twist that really does change the mindset of leadership and employees. Along that way, you've got to get your, one of the other customers is revising job expectations and incentives for all managers to include continuous learning to reinforce that better habit. So that's a great example. And then another is embracing an entrepreneurial mindset to apply modern techniques that accelerate reskilling, like the gaming-based assessments to gauge ability and progress, and badges for stackable micro-credentials and nano degrees to reward progress.
Great, very, very helpful. And a quick shout out to Molly Marsh, who's on the call with us, putting all kinds of wonderful data sources and information in chat. Make sure you collect those, click on those, and we'll be posting these to NASCA's Knowledge Center as well. All right, let's tee up our last section around performance management, and let's hear one more time from Jason Jackson.
Colleagues, the third component of the Job One 2020 survey delved into performance management. Performance management always is a challenge in government, but particularly in a post-pandemic environment, those challenges are even greater. Increasingly, we're managing our teams virtually and remotely. And we're still burdened with the need to be able to hold people accountable, give clear performance expectations, and recognize and reward our top performers while helping our teammates develop and achieve their career aspirations. The study goes into how that can be achieved in a post-pandemic environment and encourages us to be more dynamic and outcome-based with respect to how we're thinking about performance management, and that we have line of sight to our employee and our teammates' developmental goals and incorporate the competencies into performance management and those performance management conversations that will be necessary to help them achieve their own aspirations. One great example that's provided in the survey is from the state of Indiana, which has recently digitized their performance management system. That digital experience has enabled the alignment up and down the organization. The frontline teammate being evaluated knows how their goals line up against the agency's goals and organizational objectives. It gives transparency and the opportunity for collaboration, and also affords an opportunity to diagnose competency-based development and allow the teammate to align their goals and enlist the agency's support in the achievement of their career aspirations. We hope you'll find this performance management component of the Job One 2020 survey informative and give you a jumping off point for your own performance management practices in this post-pandemic environment.
And thank you again, Jason, for helping us unpack each of the three major buckets. So now let's hear from Kim Detweiler from Oregon to share a little bit about what good looks like in her state.
And Kim, you're still on mute. So if you can unmute yourself. Yeah, thank you so much.
And that was such a good beginning. So let's start over
awesome.
again. Thanks so much for that, Pam. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kim Detweiler. I am a HR manager in the Chief Human Resource Office here in the state of Oregon. And I really do want to thank you for inviting Oregon to participate in today's meeting. Before I can talk to you about what looks good now in Oregon, I think it's really important to take you back 4 years ago when the state embarked on looking to the future in regards to performance management. We decided that we would start with managers, and we began to develop a new and improved way of doing performance reviews, which includes timely check-ins. We developed a set of statewide values, competencies, and proficiencies that state government seeks in its managers. These values, competencies, and proficiencies were added to our class specs and are included in all of our recruitments. We now provide managers with the right tools and training to produce outcomes, provide support, assess performance, and provide feedback to staff they manage according to those values and competencies, including goal setting and personal development with employees. This is done through monthly and quarterly check-ins using established data and measuring metrics. Managers are required to attend 3 trainings and 1 classroom training. Now in March, that was interesting because we couldn't do our classroom trainings any longer, and we had to switch to virtual trainings. It didn't take us very long, and with the help of our participants, developed a way to now continue doing this, as we knew it was very important to stay on this course, and switched everything to virtual training that has been very successful for us. These sessions provide training on consistent accountability and feedback, including now best practices in remote feedback and virtual training. After the managers have completed the training, they were required to start their monthly, quarterly performance check-ins with their employees. Check-ins are documented within our state HR system, and this really now has replaced our old outdated performance evaluation. But with March of 2020, we knew that we needed to help our managers also. What do we need to do now that the pandemic's here, and how are they going to help them when they're now remotely working? Our state is primarily remotely working, and so we knew that we were going to need to partner with our IT department and really give this opportunity to reimagine how we looked at doing these performance and stay with the performance evaluations that we were working on. So in collaboration with the IT department statewide, we created an online hub that highlights and encourages the ability to not only perform the work remotely, but helps employees and managers with several one-page documents, some training, some help around, burnout, what it's like to be at home now, what it's like to be at home as you may have your children, and keeping up with the same performance management that we were expecting everyone to go through. So in that phase 1 of this project, we developed best practices for training for managers to manage a remote environment, job aids to assist managers in performance accountability, quick links to our policies and guidelines, and planning resources for both the manager and the employee. We are getting ready on November 1st of this year to kick off a wellness component to that, and also a technology component. We feel that this will continue to help our managers, because now check-ins, as we 4 years ago were thinking how important it was to have timely check-ins that were looking forward, current in time and forward, instead of looking back a year later with lengthy, very old performance evaluations. We now have found that check-ins have become even more important with distance of employees and managers working from home and outside of the office. So this really just took us to be able to change the way we taught our managers and employees, but not change the mission of doing real-time performance management.
Thank you so much, Kim. And I think you ended on a perfect note that, you don't change your mission, but you certainly change the approach and what those strategies look like, which leads us right into some of our conversation that we want to do before we wrap up this afternoon. We know that before the global health pandemic hit, the quality and the value of performance evaluations were a little inconsistent across state agencies, and I think everyone would agree with that. But now that we know most of our state employees are working from anywhere and not physically in the state building, we also know that those routine performance checks must look different. And again, we heard from Kim on a little bit about how they had to shift in Oregon. There's been a strong push to focus on the outcomes and results of employee tasks and their role instead of the number of hours sitting in front of a computer screen. But that does require a shift in our metrics, a shift in data collection and analysis, as well as a shift in supervisor and manager strategies, as we just heard. So Bob, let me turn to you and see, do you have any examples that you can share of some states who are moving to an outcomes-based approach for their evaluation system? And if so, how do they really take that on, and how do they move forward with this new systems approach?
Thanks, Pam. I know we're running short on time, so I'll be brief. Yes, I actually understand several states are using outcome-based approach now. So, but probably the one I can best talk about is Tennessee's again, and Juan may want to jump in as well. But when I was commissioner there, over time, our state was able to refine our performance management program across the entire enterprise, where every department employee focused on 2 areas. The first one was lowering operating costs, because we found every employee could contribute in some way to reducing cost or time. And the other one was the category of improving customer service. Likewise, every employee should be able to and does contribute in some way to increasing customer satisfaction. And we made this transition because we had too many supervisors giving too many employees high marks so they could get their pay raise under the old regime. So we talked about it as a cabinet and with the General Assembly as a way to improve individual and organizational performance and accountability. It took about 3 or 4 years to make the transition. We were fortunate because those were revenue surplus years. So we were able to fully fund increases to employees' compensation through this merit-based program. We additionally had separate market rate adjustments and cost of living adjustments assessed annually. Again, Juan may want to jump in here if we have time, because I understand since I left, there's been, we all know there's been some downturn in the economy, and there may have been at least one cycle when they couldn't give the merit compensation. One more thing, as I was leaving my state office, we were discussing converting the compensation adjustment from salary or hourly increases to one-time bonuses who were staying in the same position and did not get a promotion. So hopefully it gives you a kind of a real quick view of what we were able to get done in Tennessee.
Great, Bob. Thank you so much. And that does really lead us into another challenge, if you will, that we would love to unpack a little bit more and really do a little bit more research around. But Lisa, let me toss this question to you around employee compensation. We know that there are challenges for the states and programs that don't have a direct link between individual salary linked to their employee evaluation. Do you have some suggestions that might really help states who are attempting to overcome this hurdle and this challenge of not being a direct link between performance metrics and their salaries?
Yes, thanks, Pam. I know that is a big challenge in state government. And I think that the focus really needs to be on employee development and growth, and also the ownership of the employee taking responsibility for saying, you know, this is part of my responsibility to grow my knowledge and, you know, leadership skill and so forth as part of my job. I do think that, you know, in general, the other thing I would also associate with that is if leaders can associate an employee's performance and accomplishment of an objective and the overall mission of the organization, and they understand, and an employee understands how they affect that mission, I think that ultimately you're going to see a more satisfied and committed workforce, because employees that do feel more productive and satisfied, if they understand how they're contributing to the success of their organization. And the other thing that we've learned over time is that really an employee really wants to work in a place where they're cared for and that they understand that somebody is caring about their development. So I think those are other components of performance evaluation that can be a consideration as opposed to, you know, just compensation.
Absolutely, a critical point. And let me just toss this last question out to any of our panelists or speakers that we've heard from today. One of the things that we don't often talk about is the mental well-being of our employees. And we know, again, now that we're working from anywhere, the culture is very challenging as we're trying to ensure that our employees have the adequate pieces and components to be successful in their job without being in a company structure or a company culture. So I'm just curious if anyone on the line from our speakers and panelists would like to address how they're going about looking at mental well-being, ensuring that their employees are safe and healthy.
Pam, I've got one example. It's really more about the non-cognitive aspect of performance evaluations. If you just pitch it out there right quick. We did this in Tennessee as well. And let me just say, basically, you've heard about the leadership academies that were started. It built upon that. We were teaching our future leaders, our current leaders, competencies. And many of those were the non-cognitive competencies. So after the state had stood up a number of these leadership academies in various departments, they found that some of the competencies were the same ones that every department was doing. So they incorporated those into the performance evaluation process for every employee. And so that became, they were more on a pass fail kind of yes or no, did you complete this course? That's how they were rolled out. And again, they were mandated by HR to say every department will do these kind of things.
Awesome, Bob. Thank you so much for sharing that information. Any other last comments from any of our panelists or speakers before we wrap up today?
I just wanted
Pam,
to
I'll just, oh, go ahead. Go ahead, Lon.
Okay, I just want to add one thing. As you mentioned around mental health, that's an important piece. So our Department of Human Resources has partnered with our mental health team to just provide information. You had depression screening day a couple weeks ago. We made sure that information got out to state employees. But there's another area with a lot of work from home environments. We're even more conscious about elder abuse, spousal abuse, child abuse, and really trying to provide opportunities for our employees if they're in a situation, but for instance, from a spouse abuse standpoint, that they have options to go into the workplace and not necessarily be at home doing all those times. So there's so many things we all need to be cognizant of during these times of the pandemic.
Thank you, Commissioner. And Leslie, was that you who was going to share a thought?
Juan actually did a much better job of sharing the same, exactly what I was going to share. Our states are working with their employee assistance programs and, monitoring the situations at home that seem to be more prevalent right now. So that's all I was going to add.
Perfect. Thank you. Well, we're right at 3:30. Thank you all so much for joining us today. Let me thank all of our speakers and panelists for being with us today. Let me again publicly thank both Accenture and Neoga for partnering with NASCA on this signature report. Please make sure you take an opportunity to look at the full report, dive into the details, dive into the case studies, reach out to any of our team at NASCA to see how we might be able to help you along your journey. Please remember that we are now live with our registration for the Winter Thought Leadership Series that kicks off November 10th. We hope all of you all will join us for that. So again, thank you for joining us today for our national launch of Job One 2020. We hope to talk to you all and see you soon. Thanks for coming.